Hi, I hope you guys are having a happy Thanksgiving. It's the night before Thanksgiving right now, and I'm trying to start the party early because I have the day off tomorrow, and I'm baking some stuff and you know chilling. But I'm doing some reading here as I'm chilling out. But the whole the whole thing I want to do here is I'm kind of trying to get back into doing videos now, but I'm reading out of this anthology again, The Philosophy of Religion, uh, Louis Pontin, and there's a entry in here that is, I think, from the Philosophical Foundations of a Christian Worldview by William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland. And there's a section in here called the Cosmological Argument by Craig and Moreland here. And in here, because I mean, they discuss there's three different kinds of cosmological arguments, and a cosmological argument, in essence, is discussions of what the cause of the universe is, and that's what they are, from Aquinas to Leibniz to on from there. And speaking of Aquinas and Leibniz, there's the three kinds of cosmological arguments that Moreland and Craig are talking about here is the Thomist, which is from Thomas Aquinas, and it's talking about a cause. The first cause is by not temporally, but more by rank. And then there's the Coulomb cosmological argument, which is which I will get to in a different video. And there's the Leibnizian, and what they're doing here is they discuss in a pretty good detail the Leibnizian, and then they discuss briefly the Thomist, and then they move to the Coulomb and discuss why the Coulomb is best for the purposes of discussing philosophically a philosophical argument for why a God exists, and they move towards that and move from there as to philosophically arguing why there's a God. And I just want to read the formulation of the Leibnizian argument. This video is about the Leibnizian argument. As I've read parts of the monadology in the discourse, but essentially, this is a very good explanation in my opinion of that. The first premise: every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature, i.e., a necessary being, or in an external cause, that being a contingent being. Premise 2: if the universe has an explanation in its existence, that explanation is God. 3: the universe is a existing thing. Conclusion: therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. Now, the question here is this a good argument or not? And they say here, one of the principal objections to Leibniz's view of Leibniz's own formulation of the argument is that the principle of sufficient reasons, as stated in the monadology, seems evidently false. There cannot be a explanation of why there are any contingent states of affairs at all. For if such an explanation is contingent, then it too must have a further explanation. Whereas if it is necessary, then the states of affairs explained by it must also be necessary. Now, the principle of sufficient reason. I have a couple of videos on it. One of those videos is based on the fourfold roots of the principles of sufficient reason by Arthur Schopenhauer. But essentially, the principle of sufficient reason is, if X exists, then there's a reason, a sufficient reason for why it exists. And also, if E is true, or if X is true, then there's a reason why it's true. Or if something occurs, and then there's a reason why it occurs. So and then Schopenhauer goes into it more deeply, saying there's a fourfold roots. but it's the principle is mostly saying that there's a reason for something. There's a reason for something occurring. There's a reason for something existing, and there's a reason for something being true. It's not it's not inexplicable at all. And there's a reason. And there's and a lot of arguments in the philosophy of religion center around the principle of sufficient reason, because if we could argue extremely well to the point that it would be considered that the premises would be considered true, that it's that sound and valid and sound of sound of an argument, then a lot of good things, a lot of things would happen in the philosophy of religion. And I'm not saying that the principle is not sound. And I'm not saying that there are not versions of it that are not that there are versions of it where the premises aren't true, but there are usually, if someone can if someone can make it into an argument that is valid and sound, then usually someone is going to come along and argue why it's not sound. So essentially here, the whole question here, I'm going to just go premise by premise. Every existing thing has a explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Now, Craig and Moreland say this: premise 1 merely requires any existing thing to have an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in some external cause. The premise is compatible with there being a brute facts about the world. What it precludes is that there could exist things, substances exemplifying properties that just exist inexplicably. Now, this is a brute fact is mostly a basic belief, is what the common epistemologists of today would call it. A basic belief, which is something that a epistemological foundationalist would use. Now that's a huge question. Every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Now, I guess the question here in premise 1: what is the possibility of things not having an explanation? I mean, can we? Because one thing that a lot of atheists go by is saying that things don't have, that not all things have explanations. Now, a atheist may object to me saying that, but the Big Bang Theory cosmology does have things in it that are unexplained, and the idea of evolution has a lot of things in it that are also unexplained. This premise 1, this is essentially the question of whether the principle of sufficient reason is true. And premise 2 is premise 2: if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Now that, to me, right off the bat, I can see is a what I might call a slippery slope, because you're saying that if the universe has a explanation that is shutting out and taking away all other possible explanations for the universe's existence, while not even thinking about them, or because every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, If the universe has a explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Now, the premise 2 does follow from it. It doesn't. I mean, it kind of follows with the saying that the explanation is God. I think would require more premises. Premise 2 is in effect the contrapositive of the typical atheist response to Leibniz, that on the atheistic worldview, the universe simply exists as a brute contingent thing. Atheists typically assert that there being no God, it is false that everything has an explanation of its existence. Atheists typically assert that there being no God, it is false that everything has a explanation of its existence. See, this is what I was saying. Atheists typically assert that there being no God, it is false that everything has a explanation of its existence. Now, even still, if there is a God, I think it would still be kind of false that everything has a explanation of its existence, unless you want to just say that God is a necessary cause. But that, in my opinion, is also that's problematic also. But that's why there's faith, and that's why there's because we can't explain how God has no beginning and no end. We can't explain why God is omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient. We can't explain those things other than saying that it's necessary. Atheists typically assert that there being no God, it is false that everything has an explanation of its existence. For the universe, in this case, just exists inexplicably. In so saying, the atheist implicitly recognizes that if the universe has an explanation, then God exists as its explanatory ground. Since, as premise 3 states, the universe is obviously an existing thing, it follows that God exists. Sorry, my throat's getting dry, and since it is the day before Thanksgiving, not exactly Christmas, but you know. Anyway, essentially, it follows. In my opinion, it's not the best argument because of premise 2. Premise 2, I think, is where the problem lies. That's where all of the problems lie, I think, in this argument. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Now, we do have evolution. We have the Big Bang cosmology, and we have other things as well. And that could be an explanation. That could be a very good explanation. Some contingent being. This being will not serve to explain its own existence, but it will explain the existence of everything else. That is another thing I want to discuss about this Leibnizian argument. That we're essentially, Swinburne is saying that this being, this is a different kind of God that Swinburne would be committing to belief in. Because the essential question here, why is there something rather than nothing? We must finally come to the brute existence of some contingent being, and that's saying that God is contingent, and that contingent being is the top of the rank and explains the existence of everything else, whether we're talking temporally or by ranks. Explains the existence of everything else, but cannot serve to explain its own existence. Now that fits into the whole Big Bang cosmology, and as well as the other things that come from hard science, because we cannot serve to explain how the Big Bang happened, because you say that a Big Bang cosmologist would say, everything was very condensed, and then a large bang happened, and then everything expanded. But in that the Big Bang cosmologist cannot serve to explain why this tiny dense area of particles existed in the first place. You cannot explain that unless there's, because what the scientists or the Big Bang cosmologists can do, they can say, oh well, this happened, which caused these particles to happen. But then we have to have it's like the whole meta belief, and then we have to have a meta belief. Now this falls in with a lot of contemporary epistemology as to whether we're gonna as to how we're gonna solve the epistemic regress problem. But essentially, we're talking about more of a regress of events or existences which cause other things to exist. So that is another thing I wanted to discuss. But essentially, my whole reason for bringing all of this up is, I think that this would have to be the kind of argument that in reference to the whole Swinburne thing, if we're gonna commit to a Big Bang cosmology and as well as things that come from hard science, those things do not have a first necessary being that is a cause, a first necessary cause. A first necessary being that is the cause, the first cause. That if we're not gonna commit to that, because if we're gonna commit to that, that is itself a god, a first necessary being, a first being that is necessary and is not dependent or contingent upon anything else. That itself is what essentially God is. That's what most, unless we're talking unless we're having some other different kind of maybe like pantheism, or maybe like I don't know. I guess I'm just spitballing here. I'm not sure. I had to think about things like pantheism and deism to see whether they line up into this kind of cosmological arguments with the whole idea of what Swinburne is saying. But the whole question is, can we say that? Can we believe in? Can we argue well at all the principle of sufficient reason? Because if we can, and we can say that everything has a certain cause, then we do have this little pathway. We'd have two different paths, I would say, saying that there is a certain necessary being that is a necessary first cause, or saying that there's a first contingent cause that explains everything, but everything else, but not itself. So I don't know. That's I guess those are my questions, and I guess the whole question is: does this kind of cosmological argument give any sort of any sort of insight as to how the philosopher is going to argue any sort of God. And I would say no, mostly because of premise 2. If the universe has a explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. That's going from one suggestion right to another without discussing anything in between. It is open to the atheist to retort that while the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation lies not in an external ground, but in the necessity of its own nature. In other words, premise 2 is false. The universe is a metaphysically necessary being. This was the suggestion of David Hume, who demanded, why may not the material universe be the necessarily existent being? Indeed, how can anything that indeed, which is what his paraphrasing, how can anything that exists from eternity have a cause, since that relation implies a priority in time and a beginning of existence, and that comes from the dialogues concerning natural religion. This is an extremely bold suggestion on the part of the atheist. We can safely say a strong intuition of the universe contingency. That's a different question. Well, not a question, but a good thought. Is the universe contingent? And the answer to that question would be undoubtedly yes. The universe and everything in it, everything that exists within the universe, is not caused by itself. This bottle is not caused by itself. There are things that cause it to exist and are causing it to exist. That's the whole division between in esse and in fieri, as in one being saying that a cause in fieri and a cause in esse being one, a cause which is causing it to exist now and a causing it to exist at first. And that's a different thing. A possible world in which no concrete objects exist certainly seems conceivable. We generally trust modal intuitions on other matters. If we are to do otherwise with respect to the universe of contingency, then the atheists need to provide some reason for such skepticism, other than their desire to avoid atheism. But they yet have to do so. Still, it would be desirable to have some stronger argument for the universe's contingency than our modal intuitions alone. Could the Thomas Cosmological help us here? Now, again, he goes through this briefly. It's like a paragraph, and he says that no, it's not. And then he moves to the Kalam cosmological argument, and then that's a different video I want to do, which discusses that and the soundness and how good that argument is. And I guess the whole conclusion of this video is that premise 2 causes the Leibnizian cosmological argument within this formulation to not work. And I'm going to stop here and stop talking about Leibniz's formulation and do a video talking about what Craig and Moreland are really interested in. Because if you watch any videos on YouTube of William Lane Craig speaking, he will bring up something that has to do with the cosmological argument. He will say every being has cause and all this stuff, which is essentially the cosmological argument. Also, and I'm going to point link to a few videos that are lectures by William Lane Craig, and I think he's very good. He's very good philosopher. He's a very good Christian apologist. I also would recommend this. This is Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview by Moreland and William Lane Craig. This is essentially, if I can flip through this a little bit, it goes through different philosophy. It goes through epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy of science, ethics, and philosophy of religion and theology, and discusses a lot of things that have to do with philosophy. And like the title says, it's philosophical foundations for a Christian worldview, and he's going through all these different fields of philosophy to argue a Christian worldview. And I actually just got that book just now, and I'm gonna try and get into that here. I mean, I'm doing some other different stuff with. Actually, I'm doing some different stuff with like phenomenology and stuff, and I'm trying to do some videos about that too. But if at some point I'd like to get into that and read some stuff from there more. So yeah, have a happy Thanksgiving.